Sorry, I just have to get myself set up here. A few of us in one of the master classes discussed our love for the Hallmark movies, Hallmark Channel, I should say, and one taught me to smile during a significant event, and that helps you relax. So I'm trying to relax as I'm smiling. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Easton Stevenson, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a support service coordinator at the Les Turner ALS Foundation. A little bit about the foundation. I'm guessing that many of you are probably aware of us, but for those of you who are not, we are a private, nonprofit support organization outside of Chicago, Illinois. We were founded in 1977 and are one of the longest serving independent ALS groups in the United States. We're committed to providing the most comprehensive care and support to people living with ALS and their families so that they can confidently navigate this disease and advance scientific research for the prevention, treatment, and cure of ALS. Oh, okay, old slide deck, sorry. I apologize, I've now lost my way. History, informal caregivers. Okay, we're just going to continue. The Les Turner ALS Foundation support service coordinators include social workers, licensed clinical professional counselors, and nurses. Together, they provide individuals and their families information about ALS, emotional support, recommendations about equipment, grants to assist care-related expenses, and many other items. We also have numerous online information guides and corresponding webinars about a variety of topics related to living with ALS. We provide decision tools, which are interactive digital documents that explain treatment options and offer reflective questions that can help an individual decide what is right for him or her. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about bereaved caregivers. According to research by Samar Awan and her colleagues, most often bereaved caregivers report that they use family and friends as a source of support during their time of grief. And interestingly, they experience the highest rate of helpfulness from those supports. People who only received help from professional resources, such as therapists, experience the lowest rate of helpfulness. Prolonged grief disorder, or PGD, is a mental health condition that involves intense and persistent grief after the loss of a loved one. Factors that can affect this risk of developing PGD include recent bereavements, not receiving enough support while caring for a loved one, being a spouse or partner, low involvement or conflict within the family, and having a history of depression or anxiety. It was found that 63% of bereaved individuals following the death of a loved one due to motor neuron disease or ALS are at moderate to high risk for developing prolonged grief disorder. In comparison, the majority of those grieving the death of a loved one from another condition experience normal grief. Shocking, right? As per the findings by Samar Aoun and Christopher Popp and his colleagues, and the previous presentation spoke of this as well, general grief support groups are not tailored to the specific needs of people who've lost a loved one to ALS. Caregivers' grief is more likely to be prolonged and complicated, and therefore timely and tailored support is necessary. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, partners had to grieve in isolation, resulting in further feelings of emotion and distance from family and friends, and increased potential to develop complicated grief. A gap in supports for those who had recently lost a loved one was particularly profound in the first half of 2020. In the 43 years that the Les Turner ALS Foundation has been in existence, up to August of 2020, it had no formal bereavement services. We had been outstanding in our providing support to the individual living with ALS and his or her family, but for the most part, that support stopped when the individual died. Members of the support service team would acknowledge the death with a phone call, email to the spouse and family, and the office would send a condolence card. Depending on the relationship between the support service coordinator and the family, perhaps continued phone calls or emails would take place in the future. If requested, referrals were made to outside therapists who specialize in grief and loss, so that the person could do some individual work. In August of 2020, I started to think about the fact that people in and outside of the ALS community were limited in how they were able to grieve the loss of a loved one, given the gathering restrictions imposed by the pandemic. Spouses and partners were not allowed to go to the hospital to say goodbye to a loved one who was dying. Families were not allowed to hold services or celebrations of life. It was not advised that friends come over to support those who were grieving. When I thought about who was most affected by the death of a loved one due to ALS, I identified spouses and partners, given that they were often the primary caregiver for the person living with ALS, and they often had the closest relationship to that person. The bottom line is that we also provide support at the time of diagnosis and during the ALS journey leading up to the death, but it is equally essential to provide support to those who are left behind, to help them deal with their grief, to help them adjust to their new normal, and to help them figure out a way to live without their person. So given this, I contacted a fellow social worker who practices grief and loss, and she also runs bereavement groups. After asking her what a bereavement group could or should look like, I made some changes in order to be adaptable to the ALS community, and I developed the Moving Forward After Loss bereavement group. And again, I apologize, I'm not keeping up with the slides. This is a closed, structured, 6-week virtual group on Zoom. It takes place on a weekday evening for 90 minutes, and the group space, even online, is a safe and judge-free zone. When thinking about what those who were grieving needed, I identified 3 primary areas: education about grief and loss, a community of others who were grieving, and a connection with those who had been through the ALS journey. The group curriculum supports those goals. Week 1, we do introductions and we review the mission, history, and rules of the group. Weeks 2 and 3, we examine the symptoms that group members have been experiencing due to their grief. These can equal emotional, physical, social, cognitive, cultural, spiritual, and religious. Hearing what other people are experiencing during their time of grief results in group members feeling validated in how they are feeling during this difficult time. Week 4, death stories. Many people have never told the story of their loved one's death to anyone. So to be able to share it in a small group is cathartic. It relieves them of having the story live in their brain with no outlets. And it provides an opportunity for one to feel supported and validated by others who have been through a similarly traumatic experience. Telling the story contributes to the process of moving forward through the grief. Week 5, theories of grief. After having shared individual experiences of grief, it's often helpful to get some perspective about the grieving process. So we review 3 primary theories: Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, William Worden's 4 tasks of mourning, and the dual process model of grief. By providing these frameworks, group members have the opportunity to assess which theory they may relate to and where they may be in the grieving process. We also review some common myths about grief, which can also add to the education component. The final week, week 6, is show and tell. Group members are invited to bring an object to group, i.e. the screen, that was of significance to their spouse or partner, and explain the significance to this group. This results in group members getting to know the deceased on another level, and it provides the group members with an opportunity to remember their loved one outside of the ALS journey. I also provide 2 transition groups after the initial 6 weeks that take place every other week. This provides time for the group members to come back together, check in, receive support, and also get used to a little bit less frequent of meetings. Oftentimes, group members then transition to our monthly group, which I will speak about in a few minutes for continued support. So I've been hosting the Moving Forward After Loss spousal group quarterly for just over 4 years. During that time, I've hosted 15 sessions of the group. I canceled the summer session of 2024 because apparently the weather was too nice to talk about grief. So not enough people wanted to join. 59 spouses and partners attended a session of 6 weeks. Nobody attended more than 1 session. And groups averaged between 3 and 10 participants. While this may be small, this limited number of attendees provide a tight-knit community where amongst group members, and through which safety is felt and trust is formed. I asked each group member to complete an expectation sheet on which they first identify what they're hoping to get out of attending the group, any worries or concerns that they have, and finally, what they learned from attending the group. The major themes in this last section included developing relationships, experiencing a feeling of being understood, and having a sense of belonging in a safe and unique community. In this group, some people have found a place to talk about their loved one's ALS journey and death for the very first time. One of my group members was a woman who lives in rural Pennsylvania, and her husband had a tracheostomy and was dependent on a ventilator. She was his only caregiver, and they had 2 school-aged children. She shared with the group that she received no support services from an ALS organization due to how far out they lived, and she had very little support from her family and friends. She never spoke to anyone about her experience caring for her husband or what it had been like for her and her children since his passing. Can you imagine keeping that life experience to yourself? The Moving Forward Loss group gave this woman a place to speak about her experience, to share her feelings, to be validated, and to feel like she belonged to a community. She called the group a lifesaver. 2 groups from another session met up at our annual gala and danced the night away together. Other group members have met up with each other in person for the first time at our annual Walk for Life. The monthly group that I referenced earlier is called Living After Loss. This group includes spouses, partners, adult children, and siblings of people who have died from ALS. On average, the monthly group attendance is about 10 to 15 people. The format of the group is open discussion, and sometimes, if needed, topics are thrown out as well, but that's not often needed. And the group also meets on Zoom. In October of 2024, we developed a third bereavement group for young adults. This is for people ages 18 to 30, meets monthly for 90 minutes on Zoom, and that format is also open discussion. This is a group that provides a space for young adults to connect with peers who are experiencing grief, while at the same time navigating significant events such as a career, relationships, family, and personal lives. So often group members share that other people in their lives just don't get it. They don't understand ALS. They don't understand what it can be like to care for and love someone who's living with ALS. They don't understand what it feels like to experience both grief and relief, given that their person has passed. But others have been on very similar journeys, do get it, and we, as ALS support providers, can get people connected to each other as a supportive resource while they are grieving. We're not able to save those who are living with ALS from dying, but to paraphrase my group member who said that the Moving Forward After Loss group was a lifesaver for her, we can be a lifesaver for those who have lost a loved one to ALS. If you do not already, please consider adding consistent and long-term bereavement support to those families you serve. Thank you. We thank everybody living with ALS and their families.
Easton, thank you very much for your presentation. Sarah and I were just saying, what a lovely thought to have a show and tell at a session which I've not heard before. And then I realized I have my mother's show and tell with me as all the time. So the one question, we will have time for question. And while you're going to find the microphone, are there any questions? I have a quick question for you. Yeah. So given we were talking about grief being very individual and being very personal to one person and never the same, is there a time that kind of normal grief turns into the prolonged grief? What kind of time frame were you thinking?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. In my opinion, first of all, for my support groups, I don't put a time frame on when they should or shouldn't be attending a group based on how far out the death has been. So, for example, this woman in Pennsylvania, her husband died 10 years ago, and she just started our spousal group a couple of years ago. But in terms of prolonged grief, I think the main indication is almost as if somebody is actively grieving for an extended amount of time, where it's affecting their function, it's affecting their life and their work lives and moments. And the previous presenters talked about being stuck. To really kind of assess whether a person is stuck for a time frame that just does not seem common. I don't like to use the word normal, but common. So, I think the profound symptoms of grief can certainly last over 6 months, over potentially even a year and a half, but it really would sort of be a matter of whether or not they're able to function in their lives.
Thank you for that. So are there any questions? Are there any questions online? Any questions in the room?
Hi, I'm Julia from the Alliance. I have a question about the demographics, and if you have a gender breakdown. I was curious to know what that looked like. Thanks.
For the spousal group, it's been funny. The majority of those 15 sessions has been all women and one token male. I've had maybe a few groups with maybe 2 men, but definitely the predominance has been female. Age, I would probably say mid-40s up to low 70s.
Is there a plan for like outreach? I'm curious to know if you know why that's the case, or how you can reach in this case, men that are potentially not attending as frequently as women? Or how you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can talk with my director about that later. I think, you know, the marketing that we provide to our constituents is, of course, equal in terms of being available to men versus women. And I do try to touch base particularly with those people who I work with personally, and I request that my team members work with the people that they've supported to encourage men to attend this group. So, you know, we can always increase our efforts to attract the male component into these groups. But I think, generally speaking, men may not be quite as interested in attending a group such as this. But I'm happy to reach out and to try to encourage.
Thank you. Thank you, Easton. I'm afraid we don't have any time for any more questions, but you'll be able to find Easton at lunchtime outside in the foyer. Thank you very much.
Thank you.